Once upon a time, and back in the day, Elliott O'Donnell's friend Harry O'Mara told him the following story. After leaving school, I inherited a nice little sum of money from my aunt, who, dying quite unexpectedly, left me £20,000. £20,000 and a bog-oak grandfather clock. A bog-oak clock? O'Donnell exclaimed. Is it something you wanted? I had never seen it, Harry laughed. I fancy my aunt gave it to me as a sort of joke. It was almost as new to her as to me. She only had it a week before she died. She had bought it for a mere song from a second-hand furniture dealer in Dublin. I was living in a villa in England at the time. The clock came from Dublin to Bristol, and thence by rail to Basingstoke, arriving at my house at dusk. The carter who brought it had taken a dislike to the clock. He was a rough, churlish fellow. If you take my advice, mister, he growled, you'll pinch the impish thing in someone else's garden right away. I rebuked the irate man, and with evident haste, and still muttering angrily, he went. And I called to my housekeeper, Mrs. Partridge, and we examined the heirloom together. It certainly was a most imposing piece of furniture, standing at least 8 feet high, with a large face. It towered above us, dark and shining. I asked Mrs. Partridge how she liked it, for I felt there was something weird about it. I even began to wonder if the carter was right. It's truly magnificent, she said, running her hand over its polished surface. I have never seen so fine a piece of workmanship. But it reminds me of a hearse. We laughed, but at the same time I shivered. We placed the clock in the hall, opposite the front door, so that everyone coming to the house would see it. And my fiancée never passed the clock without pausing to look at it. I can't help it, she whispered. It's stupendous. It quite fills the house. There is hardly any room to breathe. It's a monstrous clock. It fascinates me. It's more than a clock. You must get rid of it. I laughed again. Get rid of it? But I wasn't laughing later, when the darkness had taken control. From the hall below, I heard the clock strike 1, 2, 3, 12. Hardly had its vibrations ceased before I heard a bump, 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 and as I lay there, the sounds increased in intensity and drew nearer, bump, 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 as if something huge and massive was moving across the hall and up the stairs. An icy fear stole all over me. What could it be? This noise, this series of heavy mechanical booms, this wasn't a burglar. It reached the top of the staircase, pounded down the passage to my room, and then, with a terrific crash, it fell against my door. It was the clock, the funereal, hideous clock. I heard it ticking. The suspicion that I had entertained was now confirmed. It lived. This was no ordinary ticking. The thing breathed. It spoke, and it laughed in a diabolically ghoulish manner. This horrible farce lasted till 1, when, unable to gain entrance, it gave an extra loud clang and took its departure. In the morning, it was standing, as usual, in its corner in the hall, and I couldn't detect the slightest evidence of animation. Now, I certainly had no reason to like the clock, but it fascinated me. I dare not part with it. The next night, I snuck down to the hallway where I could watch the clock, and I waited for midnight. I stood and listened. Tick, tick, tick. It was so unlike any other ticking I had ever heard, and it appalled me. The clock, too, seemed to become darker and more gigantic. It reared itself above me like a monstrous coffin, till its grotesquely carved summit all but swept the ceiling, while a pair of huge, toeless, gray feet protruded from beneath its base as the ticking changed to a spasmodic breathing, both devilish and bestial. Midnight came. There were 12 frantic clangs. The door concealing the pendulum flew open, and an enormous hand, ashy gray, with long deformed fingers, made a convulsive grab. Swinging to one side, I narrowly avoided capture, and glancing up, saw something so awful my heart turned to ice. The face of the clock was gone, and in its place I saw a frightful head, gray and evil. It was large and round, half human, half animal, and beastly, with abnormally long, lidless eyes of pale blue that leered at me in the most sinister manner, a creature out of hell. For some seconds I stared at it, too frightened to even breathe. And then a sudden movement broke the spell, and I fled for my life back to my room. But still I kept the clock. It fascinated me. It fascinated me. But I did have it moved to the summer house, and every night I made sure that all the doors were locked and the windows bolted. For the next few nights I was awakened at 12 by a violent ringing of the front door bell, while the heavy crunching of the gravel beneath my window informed me the clock was trying to gain admittance. When these disturbances ceased, I congratulated myself on seeing the last of the hauntings. But then I heard the clock had begun to infest the lonely lanes and byroads. I soon had proof of this, for one night the vicar came to the door in the greatest state of agitation. "I must apologize for this late visit," he sputtered. "Indeed, I did not intend calling this evening, and wouldn't have done so, but something extraordinary just happened. Might I ask you for a glass of brandy? Neat." I glanced at him with apprehension. His white face and trembling hands told the tale. He had seen the clock. "Thanks awfully," he said as he emptied the glass. "I feel better now, but by Jove, it did unnerve me. Let me tell you from the beginning. I have been calling at Galette's farm, which, as you know, is 2 or more miles from here, and the night being fine, I decided to walk home by the fields. But all was so still, and the shadows so incomprehensible, I had half a mind to retrace my steps. But disliking to appear cowardly, and remembering, I must confess, that I was having a roast duck for supper, I climbed the wooden fence and plunged ahead. At every step the silence increased. the cracking of the twigs under my feet sounding like gunshots. Suddenly a tall figure stalked out of the darkness and, gliding swiftly forward, took the path ahead of me. I stared in amazement, and no doubt you will think me mad when I tell you the figure was nothing human. To begin with, it was naked, stark, staring naked, and it was gray, from head to foot, a uniform livid gray. In height, he continued, it must have been a good 7 feet, with an enormous round head, with a shock of black hair, no ears, huge spider-like hands, and toeless feet. Toeless! I couldn't see its face, as its back was turned. Urged on by an irresistible impulse, I followed the thing. Striding noiselessly, it crossed several fields and entered your grounds by the back gate. It led me to your summer house, vanishing through the doorway. I cautiously approached the window, and, peering through the glass, saw the creature disappear into a gigantic clock. I was as scared by the clock as I had been by the appearance of the spectre. They were both satanically awful. For you see, I had recognized the clock. I recognized it. I had seen it before at Blake Castle. It had been in the Blake family's possession for centuries, and was made from what was supposed to be the oldest bog oak in Ireland. And the grey figure was the phantasm that used to haunt the Blakes. The next day, the vicar and I examined the clock and discovered that the front pillars on either side of the clock consisted of 2 highly polished femur bones which, although blackened through being immersed in the bog and being abnormally long, were unmistakably human, and no doubt the bones of the grey phantom. "Where is the clock now?" O'Donnell inquired, to which O'Mara burst out laughing again. "Ha! I shipped the clock and the grey ghost to my relatives in Canada." The moral of the story: always look a gift clock in the face until you know what makes it tick. To be continued, perhaps. At the end of my earlier video, the clock, Harry O'Mara, owner of a Haunted Bog-Oak grandfather clock, shared a good laugh with Irish ghost hunter Elliott O'Donnell when he told him how he had got rid of the cursed clock by shipping it to his relatives in Canada. Ha, ha, ha. But what happened when the clock got to Canada? Well, this is one of the things that happened. Every town in North America, probably the entire world, has a haunted house that just has to be explored. Where I grew up, it was an Edwardian mansion perched on the very edge of the Valley of the 16, just north of town. It had been built by a wealthy timber baron as a palatial home, but was only lived in for a short time, and it was never lived in after his family's hurried departure. So, naturally, we had to go exploring. There were 4 of us, Zach and Paige, who were always attached at the hip, and Casey. And I was there in part for the exploring, and in part because Casey was with us. Now, we had to be careful approaching the place, as even though it had been abandoned for what? A century? 100 years? It was still private property, and supposedly protected by security. Supposedly, for I happen to know the place wasn't guarded. I learned this over a few beers with my old buddy Trey, who worked as a mobile security guard. You know the old Woolsey place? The haunted house? That's the one. What about it? Well, we got the contract, but we don't actually guard the place. Just stop by in a security vehicle now and then. We don't even go inside or do a perimeter check. The place isn't even locked, Trey laughed. How is that possible? I said. Friggin' place is haunted. It's supposed to be. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was. I did go inside once, and you know what? What? All the furniture and everything is still in there. All the antiques. It's like the family still lived there. There's even this huge old grandfather clock. But I tell you, the place creeped me out so bad, I got out of there fast. Perfect. The place was perfect for a night of urban exploration. Urban exploration and paranormal investigation. So we crept through the darkness to the back door, and sure enough, it was unlocked. The interior of the house was amazing. It was more like a museum than the interior of an abandoned building. All this valuable stuff, and it was all still there. Why wasn't the place trashed and everything valuable and not tied down removed and ripped off long ago? Maybe the place really was haunted. I began to experience a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. No one had really entered this place in a long, long time. A layer of dust covered everything, but there was no sign of any recent footprints on the floor, only our footprints. I heard a swift intake of breath and, looking up, saw Casey staring at an immense grandfather clock. She spoke enraptured. It's stupendous. It quite fills the house. I can't even breathe. It's a monstrous clock. It fascinates me. I had pointed my phone at it, but then she squeaked, Don't take a picture of that coffin." I turned to look at Casey with a smile on my face, ready to laugh, only to find she was wide-eyed with terror. "We need to get out of here now," Casey choked, and I could see she was on the verge of tears. "Look, Casey, if you're really frightened, we can go," I started to say, when Zach and Paige managed to disentangle themselves, and Zach bawled out, "Leave? The hell with that. Let's set up the Ouija board." Ouija board. Yeah. Or should I say, we? Yeah. We set the board up in the hall in front of the enormous clock. We even illuminated the scene with some black candles. Satanic, eh? I put my fingers on the planchette along with Zach and Paige. I could see Casey was frightened and didn't want to have anything to do with it. She just wanted to leave. Paige asked the standard, "Is there anyone here?" The pointer moved automatically to yes. Well, I don't know about the others, but I certainly wasn't pushing the planchette. Can you tell us who you are? Again, the little pointer swung back and forth and spelled out C-A-S-E-Y. Casey. Casey? Casey screamed. Zach looked at me and said angrily, "Were you pushing the planchette?" "No," I barked, starting to get angry myself. We may have ended up in a full-scale argument, but just then the huge clock suddenly began to boom, and I mean boom the hour. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, midnight. Midnight? It wasn't midnight. My phone showed the time as just after 11. Casey screamed. The door concealing the clock's pendulum had opened, and an enormous hand, ashy gray, with long deformed fingers, made a convulsive grab for her. Swinging to one side, she narrowly avoided capture, and glancing up, I saw something so awful, my heart turned to ice. The face of the clock was gone, and in its place I saw a frightful head, gray and evil. It was large and round, half human, half animal, and wholly bestial, with abnormally long, lidless eyes of pale blue that leered at Casey in a most sinister manner. A creature out of hell. A creature out of hell, which then stepped out of the clock. The figure was nothing human. To begin with, it was naked, and it was gray, from head to foot, a uniform livid gray. In height, it was a good 7 feet, its enormous round head with a shock of black hair, no ears, huge spider-like hands, and toeless feet. The huge blue eyes glaring with an expression of pure hatred. Not that I had a lot of time to stare at the thing, for it moved with superhuman speed and took off after Casey, who ran back towards the back of the house, away from the thing, but away from me as well. I took off after her and after it, while Zach and Paige ran off the other way, knocking over some of the black candles in their hurry to escape. Casey and the thing had headed out the back door, and I followed, only to be struck down in a blaze of white light. I thought the thing had got me, but it was my buddy Trey, the security guard, who had apparently clobbered me with a heavy metal flashlight. "Gee, thanks, buddy." Pulling me off the ground, he yelled, "What the hell were you doing in there?" "Where's Casey?" "Huh? She just ran out the back door with this thing." "Nobody's come out the back door." We heard screaming then, coming from the front of the house, and suddenly Zach and Paige exploded into view. "What was that thing?" Paige screeched as the tears ran down her face. I ignored the question and yelled, "Did you see Casey?" "Isn't she with you?" they both said. "No." But before I could say anything else, we all heard a shrill beeping sound. "Smoke alarm!" Trey yelled. "Oh my God, the candles," Zach said. "We must have knocked them over or something." Sure enough, the old Woolsey house was on fire. We could actually hear the crackling of the flames. And another sound as well, a series of loud crashes and bangs. And suddenly, the huge black coffin-shaped clock was there, crashing across the yard. As it lumbered past us, I saw a pair of toeless gray feet protruding from the bottom, and where the clock face should have been, there was Casey's white, terrified, crying face. We were too stunned to react. We just stood staring as the thing crashed out into the night. Trey, the security guard, recovered first. "Go!" he shouted. "What?" I said, still stunned. "Go and get out of here now, before I call the cops and the fire department," Trey said angrily. I'll say I drove up and discovered the place on fire. I never saw you, and you were never here, right? Right? So get!" We got. We came up with our story, our alibi, on the ride back to town. It went like this. After cruising around the burbs for a couple of hours, we let Casey out at the foot of her driveway, then drove off without a backward glance. And no, we didn't see anyone suspicious hanging around, although we thought some guys in a white van were following us around for a while. Gotta love that white van detail. So, okay, the whole thing was pretty lame. But still, they bought it. It worked like a charm. An extensive search was mounted for Casey, but she was never found, and it was feared she had fallen victim to either a serial killer or to human traffickers. The fire was blamed on satanic cultists who had been interrupted by Trey, who became something of a hero. No one noticed, or was aware, the clock was missing. At first. For the humongous coffin clock began to be seen around town, always in lonely places, always in the middle of the night, standing at crossroads, as if waiting. "I've seen it myself," Trey told me, "and I got the hell out of there. Fast." And now I've seen it too, standing out on the suburban street in front of my house, just standing there, tick, tick, ticking away. But it doesn't stand alone, as Casey is there, staring at my window, her once pretty face twisted and malignant in the moonlight, twisted and malignant with hatred. They will be coming for me soon. For the moral of the story may be, for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. But the moral of my story is, for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for me. If this is your first visit to my channel, please consider subscribing. My name is Warren, and I write and tell original ghost stories and original horror stories featuring such cryptids as the Night Floaters, werewolves, and the Black-Eyed Children. So again, please consider subscribing. Please help me to reach my goal of 2,022 subs in 2022. I'd also like to take a moment here to welcome all my new subscribers and to thank my dear friend Mortis Media for his gracious and ongoing support. I owe it all to you, Mort. I really do. Till midnight. Cheers. Pictures used in today's video, courtesy of Pix here, that's PX here, while the music is that wonderful Ghost Story by that patron of the internet, Kevin MacLeod.